Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Andrea, and as you can see, I live in a converted school bus. And this space that I've been living in for the last 3 years is my temple, it is my sanctuary, it is my safe space, it is where I feel most connected to myself and to nature, to God, and to community. The reason why I'm here today is because I wanted to talk to you about the transformative power of women's spaces and how important they are for our growth, for our expansion, for sisterhood, and for navigating the ceremony and rituals of womanhood. So obviously, when I talk about my bus, I'm talking about this as like a space of solitude. But in the larger context of this video that I'm recording, I really want to talk about it in the context of shared women's spaces and just how important they are for us. Something that I see a lot with the women that I work with is this really strong desire, this soul craving for community, for sisterhood, for women's spaces. And a lot of women have never actually spent time in women-only spaces. So something that is very, very insidiously interwoven into the fabric of society is sort of like the intermingling between men and women, the merging of the sexes, the reality that women don't really get very many opportunities to be separate from males. And we see this reflected in like our household upbringings, where we're sharing our home life with males in our family, whether it's our father, our brothers, cousins, whatever. We see that in schools, in work, just navigating day-to-day life. There's very little separation between men and women. And what a lot of women don't understand is that this hasn't always been the case. So this intermingling, this forced intermingling of the sexes is really a patriarchal construct. I mean, mostly everything that we're experiencing in society is a patriarchal construct. But something that a lot of women don't understand is that this wasn't always the case. So during the matriarchal eras, there were many designated sacred spaces for women and girls to commune with one another outside of the influence or ideologies of the males that were in their societies. And we have lost that over the last few millennia. That patriarchy has sort of reigned across this planet. But it is something, as the divine feminine energy continues to rise, as the divine feminine continues to kind of come online and activate remembrance and awareness within the hearts and minds and wombs of women and girls around the world, there's this craving for these types of environments where we get to come into community with just our sisters and receive the power and the wisdom of womanhood and sisterhood. And so something that I have been really desiring to create for myself is a sacred space for women to kind of come together and commune with one another. And I'm going to share a little bit more about that as I continue to speak in this video. But kind of going back to that history, you know, of women having temples and structures that were designated specifically for the growth and spiritual practices of women. And in these spaces, especially in the temples, men were forbidden from entering these spaces. And one of the reasons why men were forbidden from entering into these spaces is because when we were living in a time of higher consciousness, which was the matriarchal era of this planet, women were the oracles. Women were the ones that were most in tune with spirit. I mean, women are still the oracles and women are still the ones that are most in tune with spirit. But this was something that was known and recognized and respected across the planet, whereas now it's not really known as much. A lot of the religious leaders, spiritual leaders across the planet right now are men. And there's been a significant diminishment in the power of women in these sacred, spiritual, and religious spaces. But back then, the temple spaces were the domain of the woman, and men were not allowed to enter because men did not have that womb to heart to spirit connection that women naturally and inherently possess. And so when the patriarchs began taking over the matriarchal societies and subduing them through violence and through coercion, through brainwashing, through force, those practices and those sacred spaces became diluted with the male presence. They became colonized by the male presence. And women lost their access to those spaces. And then over time, as patriarchy continued to grow and spread throughout the planet, women's spaces became almost non-existent because there was this inherent understanding, specifically in the Abrahamic religions that began to rise in the last couple thousand years, was this understanding that when women come together, there's a great amount of power that's cultivated in those spaces, which is why women have been conditioned and bullied out of communing with one another. There's a beautiful book by a woman named Sylvia Federici called The Caliban and the Witch that talks a lot about how the woman's body and her reproductive and generative power was utilized by the church in order to bring about the creation of capitalistic structures. And a big part of that was making sure that women were not connected to one another. And that was facilitated through the witch trials, the burning of the witches. And during this time, women were conditioned to see each other as dangerous and to see each other as enemies, because if you commune with a woman and you were accused of witchcraft, the women that were around you could also be accused. And so what happened was a lot of women started turning against each other. They stopped speaking to each other. The word gossip, which we now have a very negative perception and negative connotation to, used to mean friend. It used to mean friend, but that word has been inverted and shifted in meaning over time in conjunction with the removal of really powerful female spaces and female community. And so these are just like little brief history lessons that I'm giving. You can definitely dive more into this through reading books like The Caliban and the Witch, or When God Was a Woman, or The Great Cosmic Mother, and I'll link those in the description box below. But one of the things that has always fascinated me throughout patriarchal history has been the concept of, and they're not really a concept because these things did exist, but the reality of harems. And so I actually just released a letter on my Substack, which I'll link in the description box below, where I talk a little bit about harems and this idea of harems being these spaces where essentially the most powerful men, the kings, the rulers, the emperors, or whoever the most high status males were in these newly established patriarchal communities, essentially gathered scores and scores and scores of women and girls and used them as concubines, as sexual slaves, as really vessels for harvesting of their feminine energy so that these men could maintain power and could maintain wealth. And so when you think about the existence of these harems, you know, most people's perception of harems is that they were basically just like sex dungeons where women were kept, where women and girls were kept. But they were more than just these sex dungeons. They were places where that were essentially dorms where women were indoctrinated into the lifestyle of like female servitude for the benefit of the males that essentially owned them. And you often see them depicted as like women in beautiful flowing robes and clothes, sometimes topless, performances where men would come into these spaces and observe them, enjoy them in the ways that these men wanted to enjoy them, and receive massive amounts of feminine energy from the women in these spaces. And when I think about harems, and when I've thought about harems throughout the years, you hear the names of these men, these powerful rulers. You have King Solomon and King David from the Bible. You have Ramses II, who ruled in Egypt. You have Genghis Khan. You have all of these men that are seen as great rulers who really were able to achieve as much as they were able to achieve because of the extraction of the labor and spiritual and sexual energy of the women that they had essentially kidnapped and enslaved. But what you don't hear are the stories of these women. And when you do hear the stories of some of these women, there's a lot of tales that if you look into a lot of the ancient Chinese dynasties, you can read a lot about the concubines and some of the more prolific concubines that existed during those times. But what often happens to these women is very tragic. You know, a lot of these women were forced to commit suicide, or they were, murdered to suit political dealings, or they were scapegoated for the failures of their male owners and thus punished for that. But other than those really sad tales, you don't really know much about the women that inhabited these spaces. And so when I think about the juxtaposition of the harem to the sacred temple spaces that women used to inhabit, it has always made me really sad and broken my heart, because I think about all of the wisdom that was lost. Like, think about the women that were in these spaces that come from lineages of powerful oracles, powerful healers, powerful herbalists, and women who had really beautiful connections to the divine feminine, to the divine frequency, to source frequency, and how that power was subdued and suppressed and in many ways snuffed out by them essentially being imprisoned in these dormitories for sexual and domestic servitude. And so when I think about these things, and it makes me so sad, it creates this desire within me for reclamation. And this is what I talked about in the Substack letter that I released, which is called The Harem, Reclamation of Ancient Sacred Spaces. And something that is really important to me in my work is reclamation of language, because we know that language and the words that we speak are what construct our reality. And just like the example that I gave before about gossip, the example that I gave of the word gossip, which used to mean friend, being inverted to mean something negative and adversarial between women, it's important for me to sort of reclaim the language that has been reduced to negative connotations for us. That's one of the reasons why I titled my last class Selfish Bitch, because it's about reclaiming this language that has been used against women, that has been used to pull us out of our power, that is used to make us fear our expression, make us fear our power, make us fear our autonomy and our sovereignty. Over the last couple of years of doing this beautiful spiritual work that I get to do with women, and women having this deep soul craving for women's spaces, I've been in deep contemplation about the type of space that I want to create that suits those desires of women, that also honors the women of the past, that reclaims those temple-like sanctuaries that women used to gather into. So years and years ago, I read this book, which ended up becoming one of my favorite books I've ever read, and it's called The Red Tent. It's by a woman named Anita Diamant, I believe is her name. And this book, The Red Tent, is a fictionalized tale of Dinah, who is a very minor character in the Bible. I think she is mentioned in like one scripture in the Bible. And Anita sort of took the mythos of this character and expanded it and sort of created what she imagined is the story of this young woman. And she was the daughter of Jacob and Leah. They lived in this really incredibly expansive and like, I don't want to say wealthy, but it was a very, well, yeah, for like, I guess considering the nature of how people were living during the biblical stories, they would have been considered a wealthy village. And Jacob was the leader of this village. And Leah was her mother, and Jacob also had, I believe it was 2 or 3 additional wives. And so she had several mothers that were that she was in the care of. But what I found really special about this book, and it's called The Red Tent, was that in this village, there is a tent, like a large tent that is red, that is a sacred space where the women would go to menstruate. So whenever women were having their bleed, or young girls as well were having their bleed, or women were going into labor, they would spend their entire menstruation period in this red tent. And so when that time of the month would come, that was where they would sort of retreat to as a sanctuary, a sacred space for them to be in the energy of the bleed, the energy of the release with women only. It was forbidden for men to enter that space. And in the book, it's told through the eyes of Dinah, from her being a child and growing into a young woman. And the way that she talks about the sacred nature of this space, and the sisterhood and the storytelling and the lessons and wisdom that she got to receive from all of the women, and observing in the process of birth and getting to be a part of the process of birth, and just all of the beautiful ceremonies and rituals that the women got to experience, that just awakened something so deep in my heart, a sense of longing that I had never realized. I didn't realize that anything like that had ever existed before. I had never heard of anything like that before. And being, a young woman who had gone through sort of the trials and tribulations of being a teenage girl and experiencing bullying and being ostracized from girl groups and things like that, there's always just this sense of longing and like this wound of sisterhood that I had carried. And that book really opened up this beautiful desire for me to experience that. And so the first time that I got to experience a women's only space was maybe 10 years ago. And there was a women's group that doesn't exist anymore that held a gathering in Northern California. And I got to go and have an experience there. And then I discovered other women's gatherings like Origins Gathering and Spirit Weavers. And Spirit Weaver, I've attended Origins twice and I've attended Spirit Weavers 4 times. I'm actually going to be going to Spirit Weavers next week, depending on when this video gets released. But getting to walk into spaces where for days at a time, you are in the company and the community of just women, for me, was absolutely life-changing. And there was something so grounding and ancient and activated such a deep sense of remembrance within my heart and in my womb and my soul about being in a space like that. There was a sense of safety that you can't really describe unless you've been in a women's only space where you're on beautiful land, swimming in a river, eating delicious food, and there's no men around, and you can be topless and share your stories and talk about your hurts and your victories and your wounds and the medicine that you have received from others and the medicine that you have cultivated as a gift to share with others. And getting to have that, there's just something so profound and deeply transformative about that. And it's why I make my pilgrimage to women's spaces every year, because number one, they're so rare, but also I find them essential to like my healing, my growth, and my journey of continuing to really anchor into what it is to be a woman and to share space with women and to cultivate my own spiritual gifts as the embodiment of the feminine principle. And so for me, getting to have these experiences, having that longing that was sort of implanted in me from reading that book, The Red Tent, and then getting to go out and have these experiences was just so tremendously powerful. And it opened up a desire within me to create something like that for myself. And so my big dream, my big vision for my life is to own land and to have, a women's only village. I wish I could remember the name of it. I'm going to link it. I'm going to put it down here at the bottom. But there is this village, I believe in Kenya, that has existed for the last, I want to say 25 or 30 years, that was started by a woman who had left her abusive marriage. She was being beaten and abused by her husband, and she left him, and she went and she essentially started this commune that has grown exponentially over the years, where only women are welcome. And these are women that are also escaping the abuses of a very deeply patriarchal culture that they all reside in. So women coming in with their children, coming in with their daughters, coming in with their sisters, and finding sanctuary within the arms of other women outside of the difficulties and the oppressive nature of being in patriarchy. And these women have had experiences over the years with men in nearby villages and communities wanting to take them over, wanting to colonize them, wanting to destroy what it is that they've built, because men have a really big problem with women having our own spaces, because again, they know how powerful we are when we come together, and it makes them feel inadequate when they are not allowed in these spaces. And so when I talk about women not being able to exist outside of the proximity or influence with men, It's one of the reasons why I have a big problem with transgenderism, transgender ideology, and all of the effects that it's having on women and women's spaces. So to me, it is just another form of male colonization. The men who are claiming womanhood, who are claiming that they are women simply off the basis of them feeling like that, which you can't feel like something that you're not, but I digress. These men are colonizing women's spaces, and they're really just doing a modern day version of what has always happened throughout patriarchy, where men come into women's spaces, colonize them, invert the practices of those spaces, and claim the power of those spaces for themselves. So I've spoken about this in other avenues of my social media, but I'm sharing that here because I want to be very, very clear with any women that are listening that I don't support men and women's spaces. Like this, to me, gatekeeping is one of the most important parts of self-preservation that women need in order to protect the sacred nature of our spaces. And so when it comes to this ideology or this idea that a man can come into women's spaces simply because he says he's a woman, that does not sit well with me. And it goes in line with the other patriarchal behaviors that men have existed throughout our patriarchal history. Learning about this village in Kenya just really helped me to see what it's possible, and that my vision has already been, it's an extension of what other women have already envisioned for themselves and what other women have created. And in a smaller sense, because this is something that is going to take years and years and years for me to grow and to cultivate and to build. And so much of what I envision it to become, I may not even ever get to actually experience. And simply just because life is not in these physical bodies, it is finite. And I will only be here for a certain amount of time, but it's still a vision that I have had that I know will benefit generations and generations of women and girls, not just in my line, but in the lines of the women that come to find sanctuary and also to reignite their power within this space that I'm envisioning. On a smaller scale, something that I'd like to build as I make my way towards this bigger vision is an incredible online space where women get to come into sanctuary. I know of so many other women that have really beautiful memberships and online communities where they have cultivated that, and I've been inspired by those other women as well. In the past, I've done group mentorship programs with small groups of women, but it is really on my heart to build something that is going to grow into something massive and expansive, where women all over the world who don't have access to retreats or don't have access to in-person women's gatherings but are craving that sisterhood, that are craving that sanctuary space, can come together in order to receive that sisterhood and healing that their soul is calling them into, because it's a reclamation of our history as women. It is a way for us to heal from what was stolen from us in our previous lifetimes. And when I was thinking about what I wanted to call this space, originally I wanted to call it the Red Tent because of the impact that book had on me, but I could not stop thinking about the harems. And again, so much of what it is that draws me into this work and fuels me in this work is the reclamation. It's the returning to the old ancient ways, the old ancient practices. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. And so I decided to call this space that I've created the Harem. And so the Harem is a monthly online membership that I have created, that I have birthed, that is the space for women to come in and receive community and to receive sisterhood, to share story medicine, to be guided by me and the other women that I bring into this space as co-facilitators and co-leaders, to share their wisdom, to share their teachings, to talk about patriarchal history, to talk about matriarchal herstory, and to help women remember who the fuck we are. And to do it in a space that is outside of the influence of men, that is outside of the influence of patriarchal constructs and patriarchal ideologies. And so, this space is for women who recognize their power, but are still just a little bit afraid to step into their power. And that fear is likely from having a persecution wound or having a witch wound where you were punished in a past life for being in the full expression of your power. And this desire to have a safe space where you can be in that full expression without being judged for it, without being punished, without being looked down upon. This space is for women who are done begging for intimacy and done begging for recognition and closeness from men in their lives, but also from the women who are just not on their frequency, the women that are in your family, the women that are in your current social circle who are judging you or looking down upon you for you leaning into your spiritual power, your spiritual expression, your spiritual expansion. It's for women who want to reclaim your softness without losing your bite, without losing your ferocity, without losing your fire. And yeah, it's for women who are craving community and sisterhood and a soft place to land, a place to learn, a place to receive, a place to share, a place to give, and a place to just feel like you are returning to your home. You're returning to a place that you have always remembered and have always felt inside of you, but didn't even know existed. And that is what I'm cultivating here in this space. What I love about the harem is that, and that really reflects the work that I do just in general, is that it isn't performative. This isn't about the glittery divine feminine with the flowy dresses and crystals and jewels on the forehead and all of those, more aesthetic aspects, although we get to play in that as well, but that's not the core of it. This is about doing that deep transformative work. This is about excavating those shadows. It's about really facing yourself and taking responsibility for your life, taking responsibility for your power as a divine creatrix. This is about taking accountability for what it is that you have created for yourself, for the suffering that you have endured and the role that you have played in it, so that you can move forward in your life without being captured by victim mentality or victim consciousness. In this space, we don't bypass pain. We don't bypass the shadow. We accept it. We embrace it. We show it love, and we transmute it into something more powerful and something of a higher frequency and something of a higher vibration. And I mean, ultimately, we're just here to remember ourselves, to remember each other, and to do it together. I also created this space because what I have received as feedback from a lot of the women that follow me on social media and that have worked with me is that they want to dive deeper with me. They want to do more with me, but they find some of my offerings to be financially inaccessible. Not every woman that wants to work with me has the financial means to be able to work with me and to work with me in a way that is reflective of the depth that I showcase in my work and the depth that I offer in my work. And so I have created this space to be financially accessible to women of all socioeconomic backgrounds. And I've kept it very, very affordable at $33 a month so that anyone who wants to can access this space. And so for me, that is one of the most exciting things about it, because it's heartbreaking when I have women reach out to me who want to work with me, but they can't afford the services that I have. And so it's been very, very important to me to make sure that I have an offering that serves as an entry point for women of all backgrounds to be able to receive this healing, because you shouldn't be gate-kept out of healing and restoration and reclamation of your divine nature because you can't afford it. And if I didn't have women in my life who also showcased generosity and are willing to work with me in my budget, I never would have been able to get to the place that I am today. And so that's something that I'm really grateful for, and it's something that I'm paying forward. So if hearing about the sacred nature of women's spaces, the powerful transformative nature of women's spaces has really spoken to you, and if you've been craving a space such as the harem, to really reconnect with yourself, to connect with your sisters, to receive guidance, to receive medicine, to be able to tell your story, and to heal from the things that you have previously felt have held you back for being in your full power and your full expression, then I invite you to join me and the other women that have already signed up into the harem. The harem's first session, oh, that reminds me, I didn't even tell you about how, like, the structure of it. So in the harem, what you will be receiving, in addition to all of the powerful transformative benefits that I've already expressed, we'll be doing 2 calls a month. So on the second and fourth Sunday of every month, that is where we will be meeting in the sanctuary, in the harem, in the temple. And in those sessions, we will be diving into so many different variations of depth and healing. So those calls are going to include deep history lessons of patriarchy and matriarchy. They're going to include powerful embodiment practices that you get to take into your day-to-day life with you as you navigate all of the circumstances and journeys that will come up as a result of you diving into this transformation. We're going to be going deep into the real healing work. This isn't just about setting new moon intentions and lighting candles and doing surface level work. It's about hearing and witnessing and being witnessed where you are right now in this moment, and doing the excavation that is required to remove the blockages, to remove those hindrances that have prevented you from stepping into your full power and your full expression. I'll be bringing in guest facilitators and guest teachers and guest speakers to share their wisdom and opening up the space for other women who I'm connected with and whose work I love and admire to be connected to a new audience, and for women to be able to learn from other women other than just myself and the women that are part of the membership community. And ultimately, this is a space where you get to show up without shame, without wearing a mask, without being in a performance, getting to be exactly who you are and being witnessed in that, and receiving and feeling the power of truly being witnessed in the truth of who you are, and allowing that to break your heart open and completely transform your life. And so for the first group of women that decide to join the harem, I'm offering a founding members discount where you will receive 50% off a spiritual alignment session with me. In addition to that, all members of the harem will receive discounts on my one-to-one work, as well as my retreats and courses and other offerings that I will continue to birth throughout the year and in the years to come. And so I'm really so excited about this space. I soft launched it in my Instagram stories a couple of days ago, and I've already gotten a handful of signups. And I'm really excited to welcome the rest of the women that are really craving a space like this into the harem. Our first session is on Sunday, June 8th. And then the next session will be the 29th. Now, I said that our sessions will be on the second and fourth Sundays of every month, which is true. It's just going to be different for this first month of June because I will be teaching at Spirit Weavers for the second week of June, so I will not be available. So the very first session will be June 8th at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and then the second session will be scheduled for the 29th, time still to be determined. But I am so grateful to have had you in my space today to listen to this video, a little bit of the history of really the herstory of women's spaces, and just helping you understand how important these spaces are for women, for our growth, for our healing, our transformation, for continuing to facilitate the rise of the divine feminine consciousness, and ultimately remembering who we are as women who are the physical embodiment of the divine feminine frequency, the divine feminine consciousness, the physical embodiment of God. And so thank you so much for being here today. Thank you so much for joining me in my sanctuary, my private space, the space that I get to remember who I am, and where I also get to come into remembrance of these beautiful offerings and gifts and invitations that I get to create and birth for you to experience for your growth, your transformation, your healing, and your connection to yourself as a woman, and your greater connection to the sisterhood of womanhood. Thank you so much for being here, and the link to sign up for the harem will be available in the description box below. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.